The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by Spark Lab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about Spark Lab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by The Spinoff with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
Did you know that New Zealand has a big pharma company, or that it almost didn't anymore? Well, today we're telling the story of Douglas Pharmaceuticals, a family-owned drug giant that since 1967 has grown from a company making generic drugs, once they fell out of patent, which is a bit more of a difficult process than that makes that sound, to now be researching new uses for previously proven safe drugs. The company does upwards of $250 million a year, with the bulk of that as exports, and it was almost sold a few years ago before deciding that there was a future here. Part of that future is bringing new talent on board and a strong R&D program. And as part of that, we're going to be joined today by Dr. Peter Surman, the Chief Scientific Officer and 23-year member of the company, and Simone Hollier, a new product portfolio analyst who they took on through an R&D experience grant that's available through Callaghan Innovation, that people listening might be able to access. To find out more about getting students into your research, the growth of the company, and making drugs here, Dr. Peter Surman and Simone Hollier join us now. Kia ora, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, first up, Peter, tell me a little bit about the history of this company, because it kind of flies under the radar in a funny way for such a significant company in the country, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It originated actually as a little pharmacy in Te Atatu South. The pharmacy's still there, but the Douglas family don't own it now. And Graham Douglas was always interested, as a pharmacist, he wanted to grow a bigger business. There were limitations on growing pharmacy ownership. So a way for him to expand was to actually import medicines. So he was importing some medicines way back in the 60s from Europe. And some of those relationships we still have today with companies that he was working with. And over a period of time, there were opportunities, say, with drugs like furosemide and also with antibiotics. And I think the first manufacturing, they started to manufacture in the 1980s. So it went from being a distributing company, having a little manufacturing base. There were a few manufacturing bases throughout Auckland. And then Graham Douglas and his family continued to live out in Te Atatu, so they decided to centralise their services, and they built a head office where we are today in around 1990, and the manufacturing was all brought together during the 1990s at a site just across the road. So now there's an extensive manufacturing of products. Some of them are our own products. Some of them are products that we make for multinationals, for New Zealand. And probably since the 1990s, it became quite challenging to actually make money selling pharmaceuticals in New Zealand, because there was the Pharma Act legislation, which created basically the government as a one buyer of pharmaceuticals. So prices really would drop very quickly. It was very good for the taxpayer, and also really for Douglas, it forced us to look beyond just being a New Zealand company, New Zealand pharma company. And that's about the time when I joined the company. All of that was happening around the mid-90s. We started selling medicine and developing it for Australia. And then beyond Australia, we started developing products with Europe in mind. And the first product, generic product that we developed for Europe was a vitamin A derivative called isotretinoin for severe acne. And for us, that was our first generic, and it was also the first generic in the world of Roche's Roaccutane drug, or Accutane. And that product is still our biggest product in Europe. And we were, being the first in the market is a huge advantage for generics.
Tell us about what's a generic? Take us back to the beginning with that.
So a generic medicine is it's a molecule. For us, these are small molecules, and basically for a time, once they're first commercialised by a major pharma company, that pharma company will have a patent on that drug. So only they can sell the molecule. They have a composition of matter patent, and that might last for 20 or 25 years. But after that point, it becomes what's known as a product which is open to competition. So they call it generic competition because it's the same molecule, and the burden on the generic company is to develop a product that releases the drug in the same manner to the same extent as a branded product. And for oral products, that usually means that you have to do a clinical trial, a bioequivalence study, to confirm that the blood levels you get hour after hour taking the innovator product is statistically the same as taking the test product that we've developed. And for topical products, generics, you end up having to do clinical endpoint trials where you put the product on and you see, does it actually treat the condition if it's a fungal infection to the same extent. So often you have to develop a product exactly the same as the brand, and it can actually be a challenge to develop a product that actually may be not optimized for today. So it might be a product that's old technology, and if you could start again, it's sometimes easier to develop a novel product than to develop a generic. But nonetheless, it's all about price containment and competition in the marketplace. So you'll see a big price drop when generics come in. That's really the main advantage.
How interesting. So it's not. So it removes the burden of having to prove that something is safe for humans, which I imagine is the really, really big hurdle to jump over.
And efficacy, that it actually works, particularly for an oral medicine, so you don't have to show that because the clinical trial. So you leverage the clinical data from the innovator because their patent is expired, but you still have to show the quality. That
it works and that it acts as intended.
In a similar manner, yeah.
Yeah, wow. And is that mainly for the benefit of the prescribers? So if you go, we've got the same molecule in there, but it does a different thing, then they'll go, well, I don't know how to prescribe that compared to what I'm used to prescribing.
Exactly. So if you want to have the drug releasing the drug at a similar rate, so you don't get people having a real spike in blood levels, and they might pass out or faint, or the drug might not release completely, and then you end up with not managing the symptoms or treating the disease. So in order to prescribe, a doctor really wants to know that the product that's the generic has been through clinical trials to show that it can actually be, it is statistically equivalent to the product on the market.
And so that's what the company where it found its really big growth, taking those generics and getting into those big export markets.
Yeah, that's right.
And then tell me about the thing that is the new kind of research area, where is that a case of taking these drugs that have come out of their patent period, so they're now generics, and finding new uses for them? So they've been proven safe for humans, but you find new applications for them for treating other conditions.
Yeah, it's sort of an organic step from being a distributor to making copies of products to now making products using the same molecule but for a new disease, for an untreated condition. It's an opportunity for us to then have intellectual property with the product that we're developing and put protection around it like a brand would. These are all branded products when they come to the market, and with the protection that we put in place, either it's a patent or know-how or clinical data, that we have market exclusivity for a certain period of time, so that product can grow and become a market of value that would make a return on investment from what can be anything from $50 million to $300 million just for a repurposing. So it's still an expensive project, these repurposings, but they're nowhere near as big as a blue sky molecule. Trying to get that actually into the first in human studies is many millions of dollars, and they're sort of the multi-billion-dollar type plays for the big pharma companies.
Which is so remarkable, multi-billion-dollar budgets, and on the kind of a hope and a dream as well so often. And I guess this is where you come in, Simone, which is actually working out like what drugs should be looked at and what other uses there might be. Tell me about how you came to be part of the company.
Well, I started 2 years ago on a 3-month internship where I was working in the lab. And I was pretty lucky. There was a space for me working in research on new products. So it's a lot of actually market research. I look into indications on kind of what drugs there are for indications and if there is a space for us in the market. It's really, really interesting. I didn't really see myself working in this kind of position when I left university, but it's really interesting.
And how do you find this stuff out? Because I understand that one of the big issues with research and clinical trials that people do privately, as these big companies do, is that they don't tell people, A, if they don't work like they wanted them to, and B, they don't like to let out information about other uses because they might want to keep that to themselves. So how do you go about actually kind of going, well, this has this application and I have a strong reason to believe it could have other applications?
I think for new indications, Peter gets a lot of insight from research scientists. I don't tend to work in that space trying to figure out whether it will have efficacy in certain diseases because, I mainly look at the market for new novel products. And for generics, we use a lot of databases, Cortellis, just lots of research into what might be out there. It's really hard to know, like you said, because companies do keep that to themselves. Sometimes, we have no idea if there's going to be 10 generics for one product. So it's just kind of taking information from heaps of different places and trying to kind of stick it all together and make sense of it.
Yeah. I mean, Simone, you've come up with a selection criteria that help to pick what a generic product is. What is an attractive product to develop in terms of a return on investment for a company that might develop it. And probably the biggest criterion these days is number of competitors. And that usually means that my formulation team then have a challenge to come up with a product where it has to be really less than 5 competitors, or else the price of the product in the United States market will drop by 99%. And so then you're selling the product for pennies, and quite often you'll have 20 or 30 competitors for a drug, and it's selling for probably cheaper than a pack of Panadol, or just so we have to pick the products where, and if there's less than 3 competitors, that it's going to have a lot of complexity about it. It might be a very complicated dosage form. It might have a high rate of failing in trials and stability. So we tend to try to pick up those, unicorn type products. But probably Simone turns over about 1,000 for one that we actually start.
Wow. Tell me about one that you have got in the works, which is something really interesting around the mental health space and treating depression with ketamine, which is something that's been getting big news around the world as a possible kind of application. What's the work you're doing there?
So with ketamine, there's been quite a lot of off-label use over the last decade or so looking at depression and treatment-resistant depression. And the only product available at the moment is a non-licensed IV therapy. And that people will go to clinics and they'll get treated. Maybe they'll have an IV infusion once a month, and that alleviates the symptoms for them. But it's all anecdotal. There's no clear statistics to say this really does work or it's just a placebo effect. But in and also in terms of compliance, taking a non-registered medicine also has a lot of risks around safety. Not many people with ketamine. It's a product that you take historically for pain. If you have an accident, you may be treated with ketamine, or you need a general anaesthetic, it may be with ketamine. So we don't know what happens if it's taken for 3 months or a year. What like long-term neurological effect might be. So for us, we're really interested in a convenient product for patients who can, ideally take it at home, and it's an oral dose. It's always nice to take something to swallow a tablet than having to get an IV. So we've developed a controlled release form of ketamine that is well tolerated, and it's been through phase 1 trials. So we've seen what patients can tolerate before they start to have side effects, what an effective dose might be, and now we're in a phase 2 trial called Bedrock. That's a beating depression with R107. So that's a product that we're trying to recruit maybe 250 patients to get 150 onto a maintenance program, and we're looking to see if we can not only treat the depression but also maintain a good state of mental health for a long period of time.
That's fascinating. So you're currently on the lookout, are you, for people in New Zealand who are having treatment-resistant depression and are looking to take a new drug?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got several sites in New Zealand that are active. There's one in Dunedin, one in Auckland, one in Christchurch, and so definitely if anybody thinks that they could be a participant or know somebody who could be a participant in that trial, they can talk to their doctor and they can be put in contact.
That must be so exciting to be working on taking something like that has had, as you say, off-label and anecdotal use, and building the science and building the case for it. How did you come to land on that as a area for exploration and research?
One, we had an excellent clinician who came to us, who we knew we've worked with in the past on another mental health medicine. And Paul has a great background in pharma development with multinationals. So he knows the pathway, Paul Glue knows the pathway through to approval. And you've really got to have a product that a clinician or a doctor is willing to put into a patient. So there's a huge difference between a researcher who's got something on the bench in a petri dish and he and has an idea that it might work in a patient. You then have to have a hard job to convince a doctor to try it on their patient. But with ketamine, there was anecdotal evidence that it worked and it was reasonably safe. And also we had a really good clinician, because it really has to be clinician-led research. And Paul came with us to Washington, DC, to talk to the FDA to get their blessing on the phase 2 trial, to make sure it would meet their endpoints. If we meet our endpoints, that they would accept that as being a significant result. So, and the other element about what made ketamine appealing was that it's a serious unmet need. There's really nothing else in the space. The FDA hasn't had a new class of antidepressants in 30 years since selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So that's why I think they were interested, why they wanted to meet with us. There has been one product in this space which Johnson & Johnson have just recently launched as a nasal spray of S-ketamine, so it's one of the parts of ketamine. But really, that was a breakthrough moment for Johnson & Johnson, and we hope that this product will be even easier to take and better tolerated.
What does it? How? What and how does something that seems to be so kind of famous as a dissociative, what does it do? Does it break a pattern, or does it? How does a once-a-month dose mean that people have lasting efficacy out of it, if it's not kind of a daily thing? What's going on? Do you have an idea around it, or is it something you're still exploring?
Oh, there's a lot around the mechanism that we're learning, and there's lots of good research, even at Auckland University. There's good research on what's the mechanism of ketamine action, but it does seem to be helping in the formation of neural connections. and it happens very rapidly. So you can actually see these effects, with detectors and some very classy experiments are happening to show what's happening in the brain of someone who's depressed, who's treated with ketamine, because we already know that if you're going to respond, you're going to respond within a day or two. And there are real effects now that you can see at the cellular level and at the neural level, that it is helping with neuroplasticity and connections and forming bonds. So maybe ultimately at a living level, actually changing the way we think, or making new connections to make what was not positive, and connecting up the right parts of the brain and dampening down others. But then there's also that sort of psychedelic side of it, which you're trying to minimise, because you don't really want that dissociation where people are feeling out of body and weird, and so it's a matter of finding that happy dose that actually helps with the depression but doesn't lead to the adverse effects. So, and we're hopeful that we can get down to the level we're working at where the dissociation will be minimal. So patients, the ideal drug would be one where people can just go about, do their normal job, drive a car, and not be a risk to themselves or anyone else when they take it. That would be the ultimate fix.
So very different than the Johns Hopkins kind of research at the moment around psilocybin, and going down the direct other path of as psychedelic as you can get to try and get the same result.
Yep, psilocybin, and I think there's also LSD as well, are sort of being tried in depression and neurological conditions. And again, I think they're working at very low levels. So again, they're trying to sort of say, well, what happens if we actually dose this at a therapeutic level, not at a trip sort of level? And I think they're having some interesting results. So there are some old drugs coming back into being explored because they were so active.
What are the challenges with running research like this? Not necessarily just around a drug like ketamine, but about, like when you say it's a $50 to $100 million process, how certain are you it's going to work? And how many of these don't work? And how many things not working can a company stand?
Yeah, it does keep me awake at night sometimes thinking about that, and it pays not to think about it too much, because they are hugely expensive. And not everyone is going to work. So what we try to do is put strict controls around it and have some objectivity and decision making around budgets. So if we start to see, we would usually like to see a signal. If we don't see a signal, then we will look at stopping at that point. So, and then you hope that you can then transfer money to a product that's doing better. So I'm not sure what the rate of success is in repurposing. But by the time you start to get through to a phase 2 trial, you've probably got about 50% chance that it will get through to the market, which doesn't sound like very good odds if you're putting on, if it's costing you, say, $30 to $50 million to get to that point. So you kind of have to have 2 or 3 options in the pipeline. And it's usually one out of those 3 that will actually deliver the big hit. And then the other 2, you just have to be judicious and quite often, it's very difficult decisions for companies to make, and some companies end up failing and going back and trying once again in another population, and before they know it, they've spent $200 or $300 million, and that's where it gets very painful.
And I'll bet that part of the equation then is like how big the market size and the opportunity is out the other side, Simone.
Yeah, exactly. That's where Simone helps us a lot, looking at the market, potential market for it, yeah.
In terms of that kind of, bringing the talent and the research in, how big now is Douglas Pharmaceuticals?
Overall, there's between 700 and 800 staff, and in Auckland here, it's the biggest population by far. It's 550 to 600. And in terms of the R&D, I think we just added up just a moment ago that was probably around 130 staff that are part of my team, whether they're doing clinical trial management, regulatory affairs, where they're actually putting together the submissions to go to the FDA or New Zealand MedSafe, and there's 90 staff doing formulation and analytical test method development to control, make sure we've got the right amount of active in the product, that the impurity levels are low. And in Philadelphia, we have around 25 staff that are also working on principally generic medicines like complex suspensions and creams and ointments.
How's the talent pipeline? Like, what's the kind of challenge around doing that in a small country like New Zealand with so few kind of research universities compared to bigger markets, maybe like the US?
Yeah, it's more on-the-job training we have here. So there's not a lot of there's nowhere particularly to poach from, but there are similar industries in analytical chemistry. So we draw on other industries that may be working in contract test laboratories is a good place where people will come from. Where it's harder to recruit is formulation development, what they call pharmaceutics development for the United States and Europe. So a lot of the staff in my team have been with the company 20 years or more, or certainly a lot more than 15 years. And from time to time, we're able to bring someone in from overseas on a particular type of product area. But increasingly, we've had to, since we've got to the size we are, we need to think systematically about how to develop people in the Douglas way. So it's like the way that Douglas wants to be. And so we've got a program that really looks out to 2025, and we're trying to develop people from university and from other careers that they come from into being either an expert manufacturer of products or an expert developer of products. And so these programs like we have here with the summer internships from Callaghan, that's actually a really good way to bring in good quality new graduates and develop them in the ways of our company.
How important is that in kind of the decision making of keeping on going inside a country and building out R&D here rather than going to a place where maybe there are poachable people?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we have a little bet each way in some ways. I mean, we've got the laboratory in Philadelphia, so that was quite straightforward to get a few formulators. And if we need to hire talent, there's plenty of people in New Jersey and around Pennsylvania. So it's a great place for picking up people. Why would you go? But to go overseas, the downside is that it's a long way from where the owners are, and also it's not cheap. So the cost of development and the cost of labour in the United States is very high. So because we're working to the same standard, we have the US FDA come down and see us once a year, once every 2 years at least, and we get good audits, and we're providing product that's getting registered. So why not develop it in New Zealand? Yeah.
And in terms of getting access to these kind of this R&D experience grant, for example, where you get an intern to do 400 hours and it's all kind of funded, it's surprisingly available, isn't it? So it's pretty much any company that has an R&D function with staff running it and an existing program of spending, and that's quite a wide. Quite a wide basket, really.
It is. It's a really broad remit, and we've taken advantage of it for probably the best part. Well, since the program began 8 or 10 years ago, we started off just with 1 or 2 per year. I think for the last couple of years, we've taken on 10. I think we thought we'd be a bit cheeky that year and say, let's put in for 10, and we got it, so it's fantastic. And now we use it not only for bringing people into the pure R&D area, but we use it for the technical transfer type area and the quality control. And I think maybe 4 out of 5 of the people that went to the quality control area have stayed. So it's fantastic. And by the time they've done that 3 months, they really know whether that type of work is for them. And we also know whether they're the type of people to work for us. So it's a huge de-risking. And then I think in the R&D area, we take on most of them. Some of them go off and do another degree and then maybe come back to us. But yeah, it's a really good way to develop within New Zealand.
What kind of advice do both of you have for people wanting to get involved with an industry like this? Because I imagine there's quite you've got to have a long view and be patient to get these things through the right results. But it must be very satisfying to be working on projects that can have such strong application to help people with things like untreatable depression.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first. And we've been looking at the Douglas vision, what it's all about, and the staff themselves have broken it down into 2 words anyway, about improving lives. And I think that's what we're about. There is obviously a return on investment consideration, but what gets us out of bed as scientists and portfolio people, I think, is the fact that we are actually doing these therapies that people are really desperate to have. And I find that hugely rewarding. And if we could get 1 or 2 of these products approved, it's a real buzz. And I think with generic products, we're providing an opportunity to get better access to medicines, make them more affordable. One of the products that we developed, it was selling at around $35,000 for a bottle of 100 capsules. So that was just 1 month therapy. So it wasn't being used very much for this type of cancer that it was treating. Now, since we've come on the market, the price has dropped down below $2,000. So that's a huge, opportunity. Now we see the prescribing going up. So, and also it's really nice to be able to see a product that you maybe spoke about developing, and then you see it in the market. For me, that's a real buzz. What about you, Simone?
I guess I find research really, really interesting. And so if people are thinking about applying for jobs like this, if you enjoy studying and you enjoy learning, then I think jobs like mine are really perfect, because I learn new things every day. Some things about diseases, prevalence of diseases, also about the market. So a lot of financial stuff really goes into my job as well. So it's really varied, and you can see what other people are doing in the labs. So kind of get really a lot of broad experience and a lot of learning, which I find just really interesting. Yeah.
And along the way, has anyone ever told you that it couldn't be done here? Like, it seems to be quite surprising that it is being done here.
Yeah, it does. And I think no one said that it couldn't be done, but also I think there's a lot of modesty, I think, on the part of the company owners, and Graham and Jeff Douglas have kept a pretty low profile. So there was the times in the 90s with the biotech sort of bubble that came up and went away, and I suppose we were doing work that was seen as being just really copying other people's products. So we're coming from a sort of a type of obscure where we came from, but those skills that we developed in pharma development were actually very applicable to novel medicines. So it wasn't the blue sky university research we were doing, but it was doing everything with a molecule to make it into a medicine. And so we knew that we could do generics. So it wasn't such a big step for us to do this. But maybe it's a little bit surprising that it's come out of New Zealand, that we've got to it this way. But it's a good solid base that we're building on, and if we can just pick the right molecules, and hopefully we have, I think it will lead to. I'd really wish it would lead to a sustainable industry where that we can then work closer with medicinal chemistry as well, and actually work with some of the newer molecules. I think the ultimate would be a New Zealand pharmaceutical industry that's got a whole spectrum of generic, repurposing, novel university research as well, and buzzing along and adding value for New Zealand before these great ideas get licensed off to a major pharma company and sort of put on the shelf.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing the story and the work that you're doing towards that vision. Thank you for joining us. That's Dr. Peter Surman, Chief Scientific Officer, and Simone Hollier, New Product Portfolio Analyst at Douglas Pharmaceuticals. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tina Tiller, for producing, and thank you very much for having us along and listening. If you are a fan and follower of the Spinoff, make sure you check out the Spinoff Members, a program where you're able to get behind and support and choose and shape the investigative journalism that the Spinoff provides.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. And brought to you by the Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.